really, Cheryl put up the slide on performance. That summarizes everything I'm going to talk about. But luckily, I get you for an hour, so I'm just going to expand on those points a little bit. And in fact, just last week, I released the 30 hours of video from my Stanford class where I talk about performance. I actually asked Steve and Ted if I could get 30 hours to talk to you guys, and they cut me back to an hour. So I'm going to have to go kind of fast. Now, all kidding aside, so there's a lot of information about performance, and even the definition of the word performance, to me, when I say performance, it means speed from the user's perspective. And so I've never heard the term customer back before. I leaned over and I asked Steve, what's that mean? He said, well, measure things from the customer's perspective. I'm like, yes, I love hearing this stuff. Nav timing and user timing. Fantastic to hear you already talking about and to hear that you guys are using those specs. Just a little tidbit, yesterday nav timing came out in iOS 9. So up until now we've been blind to what's happening inside one of the most popular mobile platforms in the planet. So we're going to start getting some better data there, so that's good. So there's a lot of stuff out there. I want to talk specifically about something I'm really interested in and I think is going to grow to be really big over the next couple of years. And it ties in really nicely with what Cheryl was emphasizing. And that's looking at the user experience, user-centric development, and that really comes about at most companies by bringing design and development, especially the performance people in development, closer together. So I don't know how many people know I co-chair this Velocity conference, Cheryl mentioned, and something we did, we're on our 9th year now, something we did at the very beginning was we realized that there were these, at most companies, these kind of two camps. Remember, this was 9 years ago. I remember at the first Velocity we got up and we told people to turn off their pagers. That's how long Velocity has been around. But even then, 9 years ago, so performance, even front-end development, and back then all the ops or SRE people were called sysadmins. We said, you know, we really think that these two groups, performance developers and sysadmins, what we called ops people, have a lot in common. And there isn't a lot of synergy between those two groups, but we think the internet would be a better place and the companies involved in the internet would be better off if those two groups worked more closely together. And O'Reilly thought there would be a good conference out of trying to bring those two groups together. And so it's at Velocity 8 years ago that the term DevOps came out, right? And it's about bringing these two groups closer together and having them learn about each other's abilities, vocabulary, lowering that wall between the two groups. And about 2 years ago at Velocity, we started talking about that, and so DevOps has taken off. We started talking about the same thing between design and development and performance. And it's taken a while, but this has just kind of naturally gotten more and more attention. And I think it's going to be, and I just spoke at a conference last month down in LA, Smashing Conf, and luckily I got to kick it off and do the keynote because over the next 2 days across 20 speakers, 5 out of 20 got up and talked about this exact topic, design, performance, and how to bring design and development closer together. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, and I think it's pretty exciting because it really talks about putting users first and what the user experience is like. Now, I don't know what it's like here at Intuit. I've worked at places where the designers sat next to the front-end developers, and it's been a very smooth, cohesive process. Most of the companies I've worked at, it's been more like this, minus the pillows. So I don't know what it's like at Intuit, but a lot of times people can view this bringing designers and developers, design and development, it's kind of like it used to be between ops and development. Developers build this stuff and they throw it over the wall to ops. Ops has to deploy it worldwide, it breaks. Ops thinks developers are writing bad code. The developers think the ops people don't know how to run the code. And then they start working together and they create run books and testing, and they monitor things better, and everything starts working more smoothly, right? And so when we think about design and development, a lot of time at these companies where it's a little more tense, it can be viewed as like a fixed-sum game. These are two sides that are battling each other. And a win for one side is a loss for the other side. And it really doesn't have to be that way, especially if we step back and we think, okay, what are we all after? Designers, developers, performance people, sales, product, everyone at the company, what are we really after? We're really after creating the best user experience we can. But certainly, design and development, that's what they're really, really, really after. Designers want to create an incredible user experience, something that looks really good, flows really well, has the information you want before you realize you need it. Developers want to get that functionality, make sure it works, make sure it's fast, right? Create these fantastic. So why is it like this if these two groups want the same thing? Shouldn't they be working together? Yeah, they should. So what I'm going to talk about are some techniques to get this to be more like the yin and the yang, where instead of opposing forces, these are complementary forces, right? So some of the stuff is kind of hand-wavy. Most of it is nuts and bolts. Like, what can we actually do to make this happen at companies? So this new company I'm at is called Speed Curve, and it's kind of right along the lines of what I'm talking about today. My partner running the company is a career designer, creative director, ran design agencies. A couple of years ago, started getting into performance. We collaborated for a year or two and launched this company. And so he brings a lot of this background about design and how design flows and how his experience of trying to bring performance into design has worked and what are some of the best practices there. But I'll also borrow from other designers. This is Yesenia Perez-Cruz, who is a career designer, and she has this great slide deck and article and video where she does this talk about what it's like to do performance from a design perspective. And she admits that she used to be a reckless designer, right? She'd create these fantastic user experiences, very engaging, aesthetically pleasing, right? Not always so good in terms of performance, like 2-minute page load time. I'd actually never seen minutes used to track page load time. We like to use milliseconds, but you know, a couple of orders of magnitude, that's okay. 6 meg, I can't read it. It had 136 requests. Kind of bloated, right? And yet we know, especially from Velocity, we have all of these case studies that show that performance is good for business. So this is one from Bing. We had similar stats back then from Google Search and Yahoo Search, where they actually slowed down the experience and all the goodness dropped off. Maybe most importantly, revenue per user, right? A 4% drop. But also session length, sessions per month, all of these drop off if the application is slower. So it affects engagement, it affects traffic, it affects your business metrics. In this case, we have Kyle Rush, who ran the Obama campaign website. And he did something that's really hard to do but was really great. He did a very, very isolated, controlled performance change, where the only change that was rolled out were performance improvements, making the site, I think, 60% faster. And they saw conversions increase 14%. People are happier using the product. They don't have to wait, especially if they're going through that donation flow. It happens really smooth, and they're kind of like excited to put their credit card in there and make a donation, right? 14% just from performance. And if these case studies, and there's dozens of them, more of them out there, if that's not enough, then you have other pieces of the internet infrastructure, like Google Search, really putting a value on performance, where they just announced 2 months ago on mobile for Google Search, PageRank is going to be affected by how fast the mobile experience is and what the design looks like, right? So, you know, if the layout of the page doesn't work on mobile, you just took the desktop version and slammed it into a small 320 by 480 viewport, all the links are tiny, you can't see the images, you get dinged. And if it's slow, you get dinged. And if you get dinged on PageRank, right, there's this multi-billion-dollar business called SEO, you don't want to get dinged on PageRank. So these things are really important. Okay, so 3-part talk. This is the end of the first part. Let's just figure out where we are right now. We know that in some companies, designers and developers work in silos, right? And that sometimes the result of that is we come up with designs that are going to be hard to implement so that the user experience is fast. And yet we know that speed is important for business success. So we have a contradiction here. What can we do about that? Well, we can try to bring design and performance closer together. Here are some ways that you can actually put this in practice where you are. First is, and again, this is all coming from experience from Mark and I and other designers we've talked to about what's worked for them. It's probably not an exhaustive list, but most of these things, if you're not doing, are probably going to get you closer to that good, integrated, cohesive, fast, pleasing, well laid out user experience. So first is start off with small teams that have representatives from all the groups that are going to contribute to that product. And co-locate them so that they're working together every day, right? So if you start off by getting someone in product pulling together 4 designers, coming up with a mock-up, and then halfway through that process you pull in the development team, that's not going to have as high a probability of success. Bring the developers in from the beginning and have someone from product there, but also someone from usability testing, from marketing, from sales. Put them together, at least at the kickoff meetings, and maybe have 4 or 5 people working on this early team, certainly including designers and developers, right? And when you pull those people together at the beginning, it's really important to define what are the guiding principles for this product that we're going to build, right? And you need to have all of those people, all of those players participating so that they're all voicing what they think is important in the product. And you get agreement on that. And this is actually something that's very, very hard. You think, oh, it's a 1-hour kickoff meeting at the beginning. No, right? This is something you're going to have to talk about this over and over. You're going to have to pull in some senior management to help figure out really what is the focus of what we're trying to build. But if you lay this foundation and it's solid, then it's really going to pay off. Here's an example. My business partner is Mark. Here's an example of when he was running the creative agency. About 2 years ago, they were working on he's from New Zealand, a New Zealand news website. And so they sat down and they talked with product and marketing. What is the real focus of this product? And they clarified that. They wrote it down. This is for people to get fast, small bites of news while they're waiting for the bus, standing in line for coffee. And so we have to think about that in terms of the design. What's the layout going to look like? How can people navigate quickly? We don't want 3 levels of nested menus, or you have to go from this page to this page to this page, right? And it's got to be fast. And so for the people here in the room that care about performance, I know that's at least Steve and Cheryl, your role, if you're in meetings like this, is to make sure that that performance aspect is voiced, right? And so here, in this sample that they actually did for this news agency, news website, they said, we want it to load in under 2 seconds, right? So make sure that there's agreement on that from the beginning. Maybe performance doesn't matter, but most likely, and I'm kind of surprised I don't see anything about data on there, because this was a very mobile, and you would think they'd want to keep data costs down, and that also improves performance. But make sure that in these guiding principles, you talk about what it has to do from a performance perspective. And then really quick, get that small team that's co-located working on prototypes from the very beginning. right? I don't know what happens here. A lot of places you have that designers are in a silo. They're coming up with mock-ups. They go to the dev team and they say, implement this. Oh, it's off by 2 pixels. My favorite is someone that Mark worked with came up and said, it's off by half a pixel. Instead, you have designers, but they're working on assets. We need an image, we need a gradient, we need something like this. We need to figure out what the images are going to look like, what the photos are going to look like. They're working on assets that are then immediately incorporated into a working prototype. And you see this grow. You also have content experts who are, instead of garbled random text, you have actual articles, actual content, and you can see what the prototype looks like from the very beginning. And also from the very beginning, you're going to track performance, right? You're going to put, it doesn't mean you don't want to optimize too early. It doesn't mean we're going to put metrics in the prototype. We're going to see that it's over 2 seconds and we're going to stop developing the prototype to get that under 2 seconds. No. But you understand where things are and where maybe some of the pain points are. And you say, well, we don't have responsive images in yet. That's hurting us. Our data is high. Our load times are high. But we plan on doing that. So let's wait until we get responsive images integrated until we worry about that aspect of performance, if images are a big chunk. So, but at least you know where the pain points are and you can kind of anticipate what you're going to have to focus on later on. And if you get those performance metrics in place and as part of your guiding principles, you're going to have set budgets. And this idea of performance budgets is something that's really taken off in the last couple of years. And this is a very cleverly inserted some speed curve charts in the talk to kind of highlight the value of this company that I'm doing. So here we have performance budgets built into the product. You can set you can set up performance budgets on whatever metric you want and whatever level you want and notify people whenever the budget is exceeded or comes back within acceptable ranges. And so you have those in place. So people can track, so the team can track how performance is doing, and maybe at the beginning, the prototype, everything's red, but as you get closer and closer, getting more serious with the code, it comes down within acceptable ranges, and you can really see how you can maintain that. Another thing that's really good is to get the team constantly looking at these performance metrics. Something we did at Yahoo, at Google, and other companies do it, this is a screenshot from Etsy, is we have little widgets that only show up for the employees in the company. You usually look at a IP address if it's within the corporate IP range. You can show it other techniques. And you put these right into the page so that hopefully the team is dog fooding what they're working on, using it every day, and they can see, in this case, they've set a budget. They call it an SLA on the back-end time. And this page exceeded that SLA, that performance budget for back-end time. And they can maybe they don't stop, but maybe they can stop and they can try to figure out why. They're sitting with the developer working on the back end again. I just loaded the page. It says it took a second and a half for the back end. It's supposed to be 200. What's going on? 200 milliseconds. What's going on? Oh, let me look. Oh, yeah, okay. I was wondering if this would be an issue. We've hit the hockey stick in the database or whatever it is. So put those performance metrics right into the page. A lot of times we're collecting in our websites, web apps, we're collecting these metrics, beaking them back to a data warehouse. A lot of times I see teams where someone goes, well, I know we're tracking number of scripts in the page or total number of requests or DOM content loaded time. Let me try to find that beacon in the data warehouse now, and they're off in MySQL trying to track down one out of thousands or millions of beacons that have come in. Instead, I usually like to just build a simple bookmarklet. I like JavaScript, and I sell this within the team. I advertise it so everyone knows it's there. They can see this maybe little thumbnail snippet of performance information, but all of the performance data that's being tracked in the page, they can open this bookmarklet and see maybe pages and pages of data that's being gathered, so they don't have to go and chase down that beacon in the data warehouse. And they can see how many scripts are being loaded, how many requests, what all the timing information was. Okay, so I've talked a lot about metrics, but no specifics. I did that intentionally. I wanted to get to this part of the talk where we talk about, okay, so we agree, like, user-centric development is good. We want to look at things from the user's perspective. We want to track budgets, but what should we budget? What should we measure, right? So this is really hard. As an industry, performance, in the performance industry, we are still anchored on window.onload, document complete, page load time. We're anchored on window.onload as the performance metric to follow. In fact, there are a lot of companies where the ops folks get bonuses based on how well window.onload performs. And they discover that with all of this cool new JavaScript stuff, they can actually deliver an empty page that fires the window.onload immediately, and then just build the entire page really slowly with JavaScript, get a huge bonus, move on to the next company that hasn't done that. So window.onload is a great metric. It works pretty much the same across all browsers, small, insignificant variations. And in the days of Web 1.0, when entire pages were images and text, after all that stuff loaded, window.onload would fire, and it gave you a pretty good approximation of what the user experience was like, how fast it was. But that doesn't happen anymore, right? We have all this Web 2.0 stuff, XHR, DHTML, lazy loading, preloading, pre-rendering. Window.onload, and there's lots of studies out there that show this, does not have a good correlation to what the user experience is. Let's look at two very popular websites that illustrate this, I think, very nicely. So the first is Gmail. I ran Gmail in web page test. If you don't know that, I'll talk more about it as we go along. And web page test captures screenshots at different points in time. This is what Gmail looks at window.onload. Is that a good user experience? If I'm measuring window.onload as a proxy for the user experience, this is what it's telling me is when the user experience is done. But this isn't done. No one is engaging with Gmail at this point. It's not until almost a second later that most of the content above the fold or in the viewport is visible, right? So if you were using window.onload as your performance metric for your team here, you're being too easy on yourself. It's too optimistic. Let's look at another one, Amazon. I don't know about you. I think Amazon pages are pretty bloated, but you can find some awesome products on Amazon. There we go. I've got a daughter in college now. I think the pages are bloated, right? All that cross-promotion, cross-selling, reviews, blah, blah, blah. Above the fold, 2 seconds. This team has done an amazing job. If you look at what they're doing on the page, they're preloading from the previous page and to get the stuff that the user is waiting for, that the user is going to see on the screen really, really quickly. The page is bloated. Window.onload, 9.7 seconds. If they are using window.onload to measure their experience, they're being way too hard on themselves, right? And I haven't talked to anyone on this team, but I'll give you 100 to 1 odds, they are not tracking page load time as an important metric. They are tracking some other metric that is telling them how well they're doing at getting that content in front of the user, and they're maximizing that. So don't use window.onload. You can track it if you want. It's probably being measured by, ROM or synthetic, but that's not what you should focus on. Okay, so what should we focus on? Well, we need metrics that do a better job of approximating what the user experience is. Someone said, Steve, why didn't you get a photo that has the start in the middle of the bullseye because we don't have JavaScript handlers for what is going on in your brain. Until we have that, we were going that way with Google Glass. I wasn't supposed to say that. But that's dead now, so, right, we're going to have to approximate. None of these things are going to be perfect for capturing the user experience, but we can do a lot better, right? Window.onload is like that outer boundary way out. We can do a lot better at approximating, at quantifying what the user experience is. How can we do that? Okay, so we see here, this is web page test. Speed curve is basically a commercial version of web page test. If you remember the other chart, how my partner's a designer, remember I mentioned that, how pretty it was? We can see what like a product without a designer looks like. I love Pat Meenan, recruited him to Google. He's worked on web page tests for 6 years, but he's not a designer, right? And web page test has been around for 6 years, and you can see when he started, he didn't have these other start, render, speed index metrics. So so he had page load time. And 6 years ago, that was the #1 performance metric you looked at. So what's the very first metric he has? Load time. And he hasn't kind of reordered those, right? I should mention this to him, maybe he would. But, you know, that's what it was 6 years ago, so that's great. He was capturing it, fantastic tool, webpagetest.org, use it, use it, use it. He's also pioneered more than anyone else getting better metrics that approximate the user experience. And so we can see those here, start render and speed index. Start render, pretty self-explanatory. When did the first pixel get painted to the screen, right? He doesn't do this in RUM. You can't do this with JavaScript. So this is all synthetic testing. He's got headless browsers running in the cloud or his basement. And he can track the paint events in the browser and measure those, right? Speed index, a little more complicated. It's this area above the curve of pixels rendered over time. Here's the way I think about it. You have a timeline, 0 to however long it takes the page to load, 9 seconds. At 0, 0 pixels are painted. Maybe after 400 milliseconds, the first pixel gets painted. And then 12 more pixels. And there's a total of 12 million pixels, or 4 million, or whatever your viewport is, that have to be painted. Over time, each pixel is going to get painted for the first time, and finally, you're going to hit the 50th percentile pixel. That's what speed index is, right? It's when the median pixel on the page is painted in terms of milliseconds, right? So it's only one number. It's just like an average or a median. If you can only look at one number, it's a good number to look at. It kind of gives you an overall impression of what the viewport above the fold rendering experience was like. But we also know that people have different preferences for visualizing information. And a picture tells 1,000 words. So web page tests also innovated this idea of film strips. Every 1/10 of a second, if there was a paint event, a screenshot is captured. And then what we do in Speed Curve is we actually run your website across different viewport sizes so you can see what the design looks like at different viewport sizes and how fast it's rendering. Those two things that mobile is really caring about for mobile page rank. So you can see here, this is a great responsive design. At small viewports, it changes its layout. Links are still visible and easy to read and click on. And as we get to bigger viewports, we get more data and the layout changes. And we can see how quickly things are rendering. If pictures are worth 1,000 words, video is worth, I don't know, 1,000,000 words. Here's Gmail versus Amazon. Amazon's done. Finally, Gmail renders, but it's still not done. We're waiting for that pesky chat widget, and there it is. Right? You do this with your site and your competitor site. If you're faster and you want to get that bonus, like show it to your boss. Like it's really, really going to show, like viscerally, what the experience is like and how much better it is. If instead you're slower than your competitors and maybe you're arguing for more resources to work on performance, show it to your boss. If you're slower than your competitors and it's bonus time, hide it from your boss. But the point is, it really, really makes it clear what the user experience is going to be like for you and your competitors. Also in SpeedCurve or on web page test, you can look at your competitors. You can't do that with RUM, but with Synthetic, you can load all of your competitors' URLs and see what their rendering experience is like compared to yours. Okay, that was part 2. Some best practices for how to get this design and performance working inside of your organization. Now part 3, I actually feel pretty uncomfortable with those first 2 parts where I'm just kind of waving hands a little bit, and I like code. So this third part is about code and about, we talked about capturing metrics other than window.onload. So what specifically is that? And this is the number 1 takeaway from the talk today. And I'm going to use hero images as a way to, as a vehicle to bring this home. So hero images, we all know hero images. Here's Jawbone, this fantastic rich photo taking up a majority of the front page. And, you know, like if we look at the responsive dashboard, like it's taking 2.5 to 3 seconds for this image to appear. And, you know, what are we all thinking? Product really likes this image. Sales really likes this image. And, you know, this is just the price we have to pay for this rich experience. You know, big images take longer to download. I've never seen a website where that's the problem. Never. Okay, I'll tell you the story. So the first time I did this talk, did I blog about it? I think I did a talk about it. I called it Hero Image Delay, HID, just because I thought it was kind of cute, like the hero image is hidden, so we'll call it HID. And I think it was a blog post, and this person added a comment to my blog post. I found most of the content of this blog post very informative, but I thought the introduction of a superfluous acronym took away from the quality of the content. Like, come on. So I always forget about that HID thing in there. I should take that out. That was just kind of a joke. You know, why is the hero image taking so long? Oh, you know, it's a huge image. Okay, there's the hero image, right? This is the beautiful waterfall you get from SpeedCurve. And you can see this is the hero image. It's not taking that long. This is maybe 600 milliseconds, right? What's the problem that this isn't displaying until 3 seconds into the page? So we have this beautiful thing Mark just implemented a few weeks ago. As you slide your mouse back and forth, we draw this vertical line, and you can see what the thumbnail screenshot looks like. So we can see it's right around 2.6 seconds before this image displays. It's not because this is taking 2.4 seconds to download. In fact, even after it's done downloading, there's still half a second before it's displayed. And it didn't even start downloading for 0.6 seconds. Okay, I'm getting worked up. I got to calm down. And that's 0.6 seconds after the HTML document was done, right? You could actually use preloading and get that to start here. Instead, nothing happens during the document download, though it could. This is blocked for 600 milliseconds until it starts downloading. After it's done downloading, it's blocked for half a second from being rendered to the screen, right? What's going on? Anyone have a guess? Yes. Optimizely. It could be optimized. I was going to say more generally, it's JavaScript and CSS, right? Fonts also block rendering, but they don't block images from rendering. So images being blocked from rendering, it's JavaScript or CSS. I don't know what specifically, so here images are purple, JavaScript is orange, CSS is green. I don't see a lot of green. It's something about that JavaScript that's blocking this from rendering. Did you see Optimizely here? Oh, it is, wow. Yeah. So it could be optimized. They do this thing where they block rendering to introduce your A/B experiment, so it could be optimizedly. We could dig into this and figure out. We'll actually do that with the last one. I wanted to give a couple more examples. Home away, beautiful. Why aren't we all there right now? I want to go. I wish I had a place to stay. Oh, that's what home away does. Okay, let me book something, right? But wow, I had to wait a long time to see that beautiful photo. Someone who's looking at this and they get a page like this with a logo or a form, but it's a gray background, they're not going to engage. It looks like a broken website. The last thing I'm going to do is search for a place where I'm going to send $1,000 to stay if a website looks like that, right? So what's going on here? Oh, it's a huge image. It probably took seconds to download. No. Look at that. What is that? That's like 100 milliseconds or something like that. It finishes downloading, and then it doesn't render for 2 seconds. What's going on here? Okay, well, we see, yeah, there's a lot of JavaScript and CSS. That's the problem. And Spike? Is Spike here? No? Okay. Then there's Airbnb. And I mean, you can find anyone who has a hero image pattern design is going to have this problem probably. Again, like I want to give you money, I want to stay there, that looks awesome, but wow, it really took a long time to see that beautiful image. Oh, it's because it's a huge image, it takes a long time to download. No, right? It's a 68K image. It actually downloaded, it was the third resource to get requested, but it was blocked from rendering for 700 milliseconds. So let's actually dig into this one. This was one of the few ones I actually took time. I did a talk up there 2 years ago, and they had the problem then, and I told them how to fix it, and they didn't fix it. So here's what their HTML looks like. This was as of a month ago or so. It'd be great if it had changed, but this is what it looked like 2 years ago, too. So there's the closed body. So we're at the very end of the page, very, very bottom of the page, and we have these 4 scripts in there, and look, they're all loaded synchronously. What do I mean they're loaded synchronously? They do not have the word async or defer attribute in the script tag. They're all loaded synchronously. That means they're going to block rendering. They're also going to block the DOM from being created, but that's only true for elements below the script tag. There are no elements, there's no divs or Ps or images below these script tags. So this was a best practice for my first book in 2007. Put all the scripts at the bottom of the page. And then in 2008, the first browser came out with this thing called the preloader. So it used to be you put the scripts at the bottom of the page, and it doesn't block anything from rendering, right? Because all of the elements above it have already been rendered. But then browsers created this thing called the preloader. And what the preloader does is it actually changes. It used to be that resources that triggered, tags that triggered a resource download, IMG, link, script, iframe, object, those requests were made in the order that the tags were encountered by the HTML parser. But that's not true anymore. What the browser teams realized after lots and lots of testing was that in general, across the web, pages will render more quickly if you give JavaScript and CSS a higher priority to download. So that might not be true for all sites, and it's certainly not true for Airbnb, HomeAway, and Jawbone. But for a vast majority of sites, that's true. So what happens is the preloader, also called a look-ahead parser or look-ahead scanner, will start parsing HTML, and it will encounter things like a script tag at the top, where the HTML parser cannot continue creating DOM elements until that external script is downloaded. The look-ahead parser can continue. Because it's not creating DOM, the look-ahead parser is just looking ahead for other resources to start downloading. And so it looks for IMG, iframe, script, link, object, tags in the HTML. And as it finds those, it puts them in the download queue. And then a couple years ago, they added this logic of, and let's move things that are scripts and style sheet links, let's move those to the top of that queue. So you see these 4 scripts at the bottom. I highlighted their last 4 characters. Where do they show up in the waterfall chart? So there's like, I don't know what, 80 requests in this page. Those 4 script tags are the very last resource tags in the page, and yet those 4 scripts get downloaded in the first 10 requests of that waterfall chart. Right? Now, they won't block DOM elements from getting rendered, but when these scripts get executed, because as soon as they arrive, they get executed, they're going to block the rendering thread from painting anything to the screen. Well, you know, Steve, you're all worked up. Your doctor told you to settle down. You know, it's not 12K, 160K, 43, 23. 160 is kind of big, but, you know, it's not that much JavaScript. It only adds up to 238K of JavaScript. Ah, but that's right, that's gzipped. What is that ungzipped? 800K of JavaScript. It's nice that it arrives kind of quickly because it's gzipped, but the parser does not parse compressed JavaScript. It uncompresses it, and now it has 800,000 characters that it has to parse and execute. And that takes time. And that is what's blocking images from getting rendered to the page, right? Okay, so we understand the mechanics of the browser. I love that. I think that's a lot of fun. What can we do now that we understand what's going on? JavaScript is blocking images from rendering. What can we do? We got here because we want metrics that we can use to measure the user experience. Clearly, these hero images are part of the user experience. How can I measure when they get rendered? Well, we do that with custom metrics. And this is applied to the most important elements on the page, design elements, like a hero image. And the way that you implement custom metrics is with the user timing spec. Thank you, Cheryl. Right? It just lets you add these marks and measures to the page. And so we can add a user timing mark to when the image, hero image loads, right? And the beauty about these custom metrics is they'll show up in your RUM. That's what Philip's talking about tonight. And synthetic, that's what SpeedCurve does. It'll show up in both of those systems. So you can write one set of metrics and you can track them in both of your metric systems. Okay, so what exactly is a custom metric? The most famous example is this article from Twitter 3 years ago where they said their most important performance metric was time to first tweet. How long does it take for the tweet at the top of the timeline to appear? Because once that appears, the user can start engaging with the page. They don't care if the 10th one isn't rendered yet when they start reading, as long as it gets rendered by the time they get down to number 10. So when does the first one get rendered? How would you do that? Well, okay, here's Eric Lawrence, who for some reason is now tweeting 40 times a day. How would I measure when the first tweet in my timeline got rendered? I would probably measure the image, because I know that's a separate request, and I would want to know when it appeared. So it seems pretty straightforward, right? We could just like track the image on load for that image. Well, it turns out it's a lot more complicated than that. So I sat down about 3 or 4 weeks ago and I said, let me think how I would do this. Let me email Philip Tellis, Ilya Grigorik, Andy Davies, the 5 or 6 gurus I knew around the world. How would you guys do this? And we came up with these 5 candidate solutions. And so I created this test page. In this test page, I have an image. It takes 1 second to download. I know scripts and style sheets block images, block hero images, block all images from rendering. So to try to test that, I have a script, a synchronous blocking script that takes 3 seconds, a style sheet that takes 5 seconds, right? And I want to see which of these techniques most accurately measures when the image displays. When does the image display? What's the source of truth? The image displays in 5,200 milliseconds. You might ask, Steve, how do you know it's 5,200 milliseconds? Because we have these awesome tools like web page tests that take a screenshot every 10th of a second. So actually it's somewhere between 5101 and 5299, but around 5,200 milliseconds. And I tested this across all browsers. is when the image displays. So we want to find which technique is as close to 5200 milliseconds as possible. Let's walk through these techniques because I like code. We could use the resource timing spec. And if we do that, here's some sample code that shows you how to do that. If we did that, it would tell us 1500 milliseconds, which we know is not the right answer. It's not that resource timing is wrong or buggy, it's just answering a different question. Resource timing tells you when the image was done downloading. And we know it's not an issue of download time, it's what's blocking the rendering. So resource timing is not a valid approach. We could attach to the image onload. The image onload also is inaccurate. That measures the download time, but doesn't even do that accurately. Because we have a 3-second script, the onload won't be executed until after that 3-second script is done. So the onload is actually blocked by the slow script, and it's telling us a number that's inaccurate anyway. We could do a mutation observer, a little more complex. The actual code's about 30 lines. Here's just a little sample to get you started. You can look at the test page if you want the document source to see the full code. And basically, it's a way of saying, call me back if there's a change to a DOM element in the page, and we can look at the DOM element that changed and see if it's the image. And if it's the image, we know that that image has been created in the page. And it says about 3,000 milliseconds, again, because it's blocked by the long script, but still it's too optimistic of a time. It's telling us when the image was downloaded and the DOM element was created, but not when it displayed to the screen. So we can try another kind of hack where we just, some people have espoused using this technique where you just pull every 100 milliseconds and you see if the image element's offset height or any other kind of position property has been set. And sure enough, at 3 seconds after the blocking script is done and the DOM was created, this will fire, and it's kind of like mutation observer. Yeah, the DOM element was created, but it wasn't rendered to the screen. The only technique that works is this very simple inline script technique. I have my IMG tag. Right after it, I have an inline script that calls the user timing mark API. Why does this work? Because all of those things, scripts and style sheets, block the DOM from being created. Eventually, those are going to relinquish their blocking effect, and the HTML parser is going to race down the page. It's going to create this element, the image already finished downloading because it was only 1 second, and it's going to get rendered right away, and then we're going to call this mark. So it's going to give us an accurate measurement for when image rendering appears within about 100 milliseconds. But this is only true because this test page was really focused on these blocking things like scripts and style sheets. What if the image itself is actually the blocking thing? It's a huge image and it takes maybe 7 seconds to download. Well, we can see in this case, inline script does not give us the right answer, but resource timing and image onload do. So, thank you. So, we want to use one of those techniques. Image onload has wider support. The code's a little simpler. I prefer that one. So, we now know how we can write a custom metric, a mark, to accurately measure when images are rendered to the screen. We just have to take the max of the image onload technique and the inline script technique. So you add 2 marks to your page, take the maximum of those 2. And like I said, most performance monitoring services will visualize these user timing marks and measures in their UIs without you doing any extra work. So here's Speed Curve. We have a customer that had all ads rendered and hero image displayed. In fact, 25% of Speed Curve customers are implementing custom metrics. And those get surfaced in our UI automatically. You don't have to do any work. And here's a screenshot from Impulse, Philip Tellis's rum product. And they surface these metrics, these custom metrics as well. So that takes us full circle. We're back at the beginning. What we want to do is we really want to focus on what the user experience is. And we have these techniques for how we can try to pull teams together so that everyone has common expectations of what that's going to be like. And now we also know how we can measure it. And so, to me, I hope the takeaways you'll get from this are start off with that cohesive, small, interdisciplinary team by figuring out what it is in the app that matters the most. In fact, it's not even that hard. Find the top 5 or 10 things that matter and instrument that matter the most from the user experience perspective. And it doesn't even have to be the top one, do the top 5 or 10. And you can put these marks and measures in for all of those, the hero image, the cross-selling section, the ads, whatever it is you want. All of those will be available in your performance monitoring service. And you can, maybe this quarter you're really focused on the user experience. So you're going to track that hero image and you're really going to optimize that. And then maybe next quarter, once you have that done, you focus on the cross-selling, cross-promotion part of the app, right? If this stuff seems kind of interesting to you, I recommend you read Laura Hogan's book, Designing for Performance, from Etsy. Also, this Velocity Conference does a lot of talking about performance and design. So we'll be in New York in October and Amsterdam also. If you can swing Amsterdam, I think it's going to be more fun. And that's it. Thank you.
We have time for questions.
A few questions?
On Intuit TV, if you have a question, you can put it in the chat room and we'll surface it for you. In the meantime, can we get some microphones? I'll grab one.
And I'm happy to repeat the question.
Okay. We'll definitely need to have the questions, but does anybody have a question first? And Intuit TV can't see you, so tell your name. And
hey, this is Siddharth. Thanks for a great presentation. The question I had was a web page test, and even all the examples you had shown. I think most of the data that web page test shows is average amount of time, and would love to get your thoughts on average versus median versus TP and RAM data and how we should be thinking about that.
Yeah, so what web page test does is kind of nice, is you have a URL you want to test, you plug it into web page test, you can just load it once and it will tell you the numbers it gets. What most people do is they'll load it multiple times. Web page test, since it's a free service, you can't load it more than 10 times. What I usually do is I pick 9, because web page test is going to pick the median. According to whatever metric you want, by default, it runs it 9 times, and it sorts it by page load time by default. It still sorts by page load time. Web page test is the #1 testing tool that Google Chrome uses. When they sort based on speed index. So this is a suggestion I've made to Pat. It's something we do in SpeedCurve automatically because we're much more focused on user experience metrics than window.onload. But what web page test does is by default, it sorts those 9 by page load time and it takes the median one. So that's as far as web page test goes. I don't know that it takes any averages. I think it takes the median run and then it shows you the data for that median run. In general, what to look at, average, if you can only look at one number, look at average, because it's going to take into consideration outliers, but it depends on the data. The outliers could really skew an average. So usually the best thing to look at is a histogram, but that requires a chart. Maybe people, and like you can't do histograms over time. And so, especially if you want a chronological chart, do like median and 90th percentile or 95th percentile would be the best thing to look at for whatever metric. Hopefully there are custom metrics that you're looking at.
Hey Steve, this is Steve. I think just to help with Siddharth's question, he's asking about how you think about synthetic versus real user monitoring. And I think you had, in your talked about both, using both.
Yeah.
So maybe if you could elaborate a little bit about that. and why we would use both.
Yeah. So synthetic is really helpful to have consistent test conditions time after time after time, so that if there's a problem that's being caused by the work that you're doing, like your code or hardware, you'll be able to detect that regression.
Oh, great.
So that's really good. And then also other things you can get from synthetic, like you can get screenshots, you can get CPU time. I didn't
couldn't
show
find
it.
your
We get
badge,
CPU time.
so we'll have
We
to
can
work on
show
that.
you what's taking
But
most
yeah,
of the time.
I was looking for your name and I didn't find it either.
RUM has, the data's not as deep, but it reflects what your real users are experiencing. And you get really, really high volumes of data typically. And so you're not going to know what the screen looks like. You're not going to be able to see CPU. But maybe in your synthetic, you don't have a test location in Idaho and you have a lot of users in Idaho. So RUM is going to be able to give you data that represents the geographic locations, the network profiles, the hardware profiles, the strange user accounts where someone has 5 million photos that your real users are experiencing. So they do really complement each other. The other thing that's hard with RUM is if you're doing like a stealth beta or something like that, there are no real users. And so how do you get performance data on something like that? You can do that with synthetic. So they really, the two really complement each other really well. If you have a product that's in production with real users, you definitely need RUM. To me, anyone who's developing a product needs synthetic so they can track that from the get-go. Yeah.
Again, thanks for a good talk. I think back to the Airbnb example, I think I might have missed it. Or what was the solution for that one? Because yeah, it seems like a common problem.
I always forget to mention the solution. So they moved those scripts to the bottom, which is usually an indicator that those scripts are not like building the menu at the top of the page or some kind of critical DOM. It's script, it's probably JavaScript that's less important. Just add the async attribute. The problem with doing that if you have 4 scripts is async does not preserve execution order. So if C depends on B and B depends on A, if you just add async, C might download first, it gets parsed and executed, and none of the symbols from A and B are there, and so you get undefined JavaScript errors. So one thing you can do about that, you could concatenate those 3 scripts, make them one script, and just add the async attribute. Or defer. Yes. Here's a mic.
So I was just wondering, the user that comes to your site for the first time would have a different experience than some of our users that are using the product every day. They would have a lot of this information cached, a lot of this CSS and JavaScript. So do you separate out the sort of first use from re-entry so that that page would load much faster?
Yeah, so that's an important consideration. RUM will capture those user experience where they have things in cache. Unfortunately, it's really hard for RUM to tell you whether this user had a fast experience because they have a great connection and a fast computer, and it's really a first-time visit, versus it's someone on a normal computer, but they had 90% of the resources. There's no way to measure whether it's a cached experience or an uncached experience. In synthetic, we actually, by default, only show the empty cache experience, but you can also turn on a repeat view experience where we run it, we load the cache. Typically, we run it, we clear the cache, we run it again. We'll do that 9 times and pick the median. You can say, well, no, run it, and then run it again, and tell me what it looks like if the cache is full.
That would be our last question, but I do have a follow-up on that, Steve. Claire works for a product called QuickBase, and when people use QuickBase, they use it all day long, every day. It's like same thing with QuickBooks Online. We're dealing with people that are viewing the page. Do you have any suggestions when you know that the person is repeating throughout the day and every day and throughout the weeks?
Well, my first suggestion is kind of a wise guy answer is go to Philip's talk tonight, because he's talking about instrumenting single-page web apps. So to do that, but as I guess that would be the main thing, is make sure that you want to gather these metrics, and if you add custom metrics, you can do that for a session that lasts 5 hours, but you just have to think about, it's a little more work to put those metrics into your code, to say, okay, well, they downloaded the first page, now they're opening a folder. So you have to go into your JavaScript code where they click on the button and add a start mark, and then it does 5 XHRs, the last one comes back, you lay out, and wherever the last bit of JavaScript code that lays out the DOM, you take another mark and do a measure between those two. And so it really puts, that was another thing, window.onload, we didn't have to do anything except just collect the data. Now with this measure and mark stuff, we have to do JavaScript programming, and we have to synchronize that start and end and make sure we capture all the flows, and as the code is changing, that's a hard thing to do, but that's the answer for that. And so I think questions are over, but I'll stay for as long. I think we have a break.
We have a break for a couple of minutes. We're going to take you away for a meeting with some leadership, but we'll be back. If you want to stick around later on, we'll be, our lunch is from 12 to 1, and we'll be around for all day. Thank you, everybody. If you could give a round of applause for Steve.